Now, I have the big pleasure to announce our next talk. It's around a subject that's also very dear to us here at Co-Liv, and it treats the subject of diversity and co-living. And so I'm very glad to be joined by Denise Umubyeyi, if I pronounce this correctly, but I think you can correct me. Hi, Denise.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm great, thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Where are you calling us from?
I am calling from San Juan, Puerto Rico, where it is 6:30 a.m. right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for waking up that early. We have the entire team applauding you. So, well, without further ado, the stage is yours because I know that you have something very important to say.
Yes, thank you so much. And I really appreciate being invited to speak today, and super excited to also meet this community. It's just been such a fun time. And thank you to the last speaker, really touched on some of the things that I also really truly believe in when we're thinking about co-living and diversity, and also what inclusive design can look like. And so just to kick us off, hello everyone. My name is Denise, actually spelled like Denise, Denise Umubyeyi, and I'm about 3 months into co-living. Basically, it's a very new thing for me. And so when I'm not marveling at my decisions of the past 3 months, I am the co-founder of tech startup 5 to 9. It's a program and events management software that uses data to access impact with a focus on measuring and identifying gaps in inclusion. So that's what I usually do. So, but what a time to really get into co-living though. There's a pandemic, racial and social issues are receiving heightened attention, and isolation due to our new friend COVID has never been more encouraged despite its detrimental effects. And so no wonder when I told friends and family about a couple of months ago that I was going to be considering co-living, they were quite concerned, and for real reasons. I personally wasn't living in circumstances too that I cared too much about. I spent most of my time in cold and windy Chicago and New York. And on the day that I left New York, the city had just gotten a horrible snowstorm that had snow that was basically up to your knees. And so my destination on February 3rd, 2021, as I mentioned, was Puerto Rico. So I did not care what was awaiting me, only the fact that there were beaches, it was warm, and amazing food. Now, I'd heard about co-living before. A few operators began laying roots in Chicago right after I had just graduated from college, and was in that in-between stage of living with my parents to save money, and also at the same time, about a few months in, needing to leave because they were treating me like a child. And so I needed my freedom at that point in 2015. So I was looking for housing and came across this cool concept in 2015 of living in housing that was non-committal, and you didn't have the additional pressure of finding, in housing or choosing your own roommates. So I was super excited about this. At that point, I was just getting started with my startup. Um, that time, oh, I'm so sorry, someone's speaking? Oh, maybe it was just an echo. At that point, I was just getting started with my startup. And at that time, I was in the networking and events space, and also in executive search downtown Chicago. So this co-living situation seemed like the perfect fit for the extroverted person that I am. So I was super excited about this idea in 2015. And so I was scrolling through the website that I had found for this co-living at that point. I think you in Chicago, right in the city. I clicked on the benefits. I was like, this sounds amazing. I clicked on the pictures of the living situation. I was like, yes, modern living appliances. The first thing that I care about is a kitchen that's just like neat and amazing. And I clicked on the location. I was like, yeah, I wanted to live in a primarily and historically Black neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And this place really wasn't that, but the benefits and the pictures so far were super exciting. And then I clicked on the pricing and my eyes were like, whoa. And that's basically where my co-living dreams and excitement about it basically died. I could definitely not flip that bill with what was at that point a salary that was just a little bit above minimum wage. So co-living went to the back burner, and I never thought about it as an option for myself until recently. Now, fast forward from 2015 to 6 years later, 2021, my income made the idea of co-living a little more accessible, But as I had mentioned, what a time it was to consider co-living. I was faced with different challenges. One, the world was going through a massive pandemic, as I mentioned. Isolation and quarantining was much more encouraged than co-living, and co-living felt like the opposite of that. And we were months into the country's biggest racial awakening. And when I walked into my new living environment that day, February 3rd of 2021, I was confronted with more people than I'd been around for a whole year. A hug from someone. I didn't even know, like, what do you do with this anymore? And then a group of people that did not look like me. This was the first time I had to live in a predominantly white space. This was not the first time I had to live in a predominantly white space. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I went to a predominantly white university and worked in tech. So I was accustomed to this space and probably a fit for it. And so the racial awakening that had taken over the US during the pandemic made me even more aware, though, of my difference in this group even more. As a Black person in America and a woman, and an immigrant, my lived experience of being othered, code switching, and navigating the nuances of being in a predominantly white space had been a little bit out of practice. What would inclusion in this group look like for me was kind of some of the things that I was really thinking about. And would this group be a part of what that inclusion looked like? And so when I think about the past 3 months into co-living, and I really have a few key takeaways. And when I also think about how co-living can be made inclusive, I think the last speaker touched on so many different ones that I think the audience can definitely take with them. But for me and my personal experience, and who knows what I'll have to say about it also a couple of years into this, because I'm definitely doing co-living for longer. But here is a few basically major takeaways that I thought about. One, making co-living affordable and accessible. When I think about my first entry into co-living, I saw an article that CoLiv put out around the fact that like 5 years ago, maybe 1% of people who are currently in co-living were part of the co-living community. And I kind of want to put my hand up and be like, I was one of those people. However, I'd ended up not being part of the co-living community because when you think about just income inequality and the fact that women make 67 cents on the dollar and Black women even less, it's a wonder why affordability can be a big detriment to thinking about co-living. And so as a startup founder, when I'm thinking about even my current situation, my house really considered that piece as well in the way that they included me and my accommodations in this home when it comes to income inequality and also what also it means to be a founder. You're usually not making what you used to make when you were in corporate. So that really made this really affordable for me. And so co-living can really be creative around how they think about rent and other costs associated with co-living and putting income inequality as a consideration for that. And I know there are a few co-living situations that have done that and thought about what their community looks like, what does income inequality look like, and how can we also put that into consideration as we think about making co-living more affordable and also more accessible for people. And then the second one was, for those thinking about getting into co-living, be proactive rather than reactive. As we saw with the recent, specifically in the US, and one can also touch on other places around the world, the racial reawakening, a lot of companies, especially when you're thinking about tech companies, were super reactive and had to make quick decisions around what does diversity and inclusion mean to them. And I think for co-living operators, something that's happening right now, or even when people are thinking about getting into co-living, thinking about those first people that you hire early on. Do they represent the vision you have for diversity and inclusion? Thinking about the practices that the last speaker spoke about for when you're even getting into a neighborhood or learning about those neighborhood. Inclusive design, that's basically puts also that in consideration of the neighborhood that's being built in implications also for gentrification in those neighborhoods. And if you're even building in historically diverse neighborhoods, start by even inviting people who live there first. A lot of times when we build something amazing, we look outside and we look at people who maybe look like us or people we first know, but really thinking about what does the neighborhood I'm living in, how can I also create space for people in that neighborhood, and obviously look outside, because one of the most beautiful things that I've also experienced in co-living is the fact that I just meet so many people that I probably wouldn't have come across if I had chosen the more traditional route of, you know, finding people I know and living in a traditional living situation. And so encouraging really the proactiveness around thinking about diversity and inclusion early on. And then the last two things, first is personal work. I've personally been doing personal work. As a Rwandan immigrant Black woman in America, I've had to do the work of why I see more people like me in spaces that have historically failed to include Black Americans. And I could get into that, but I only have 10 minutes. So a few considerations. I've been recently reading a book called Caste. It's by Isabel Wilkerson, and it really gets into it. And many more scholars and writers of the inequality we see in the world, not just in the US, get into this whole concept of why we see the inequality that we see today. So doing your homework to understand and be better equipped to be part of the solution is just super important. And every one of us can really do that. And then as soon as you know your own personal bias, conscious and also unconscious, it just makes it so much easier. Actually, it's easier said than done, but you're just more equipped to enter into a conversation, hire people, and also think about the implications of the work that co-living is doing for the neighborhoods that co-living ends up in places that co-living ends up spending time. And then I would be remiss as a data-driven company to not talk about data. And so the last thing is survey, 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 especially in spaces where you have seen co-living is working really well. Let's do our research and understand why that's working. I am just one data point and probably not the most replicative of what other people or Black people or people of color in co-living look like. So really making sure to have conversations across people. And I'm also a person in tech, so it makes it much more easier, which is why I called it the fit earlier. So how do we really think about people from different backgrounds, do data and understand all of that? Because humans are super social. However, the social structures that we humans are put to be social have historical implications that just make it so hard and just add complication to what diversity inclusion looks like. And so doing that personal work, thinking about making things more accessible, and also being proactive rather than reactive are some of the first steps that we can all do to really make co-living more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much for bringing up this topic, for sharing, and for being completely transparent. Um, there's a lot of things that struck me in your talk, and I feel like, can I share something with you?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Two things, right? It's like the first one is you talked a lot around like neighborhood inclusion, and I think one of the biggest challenges is how can we make sure that what we're creating is not just a bubble, but really where we also include the people around us. And I know for most co-living operators, it is not the priority, and it's not easy as well.
Mhm.
But it definitely, it reminded me of like one example where the co-living space actually opened up a cafe just with the food and customs of that local neighborhood.
Mm.
And the second thing is, I think that you know what we've been witnessing over the last like 10 years, there's been like different shifts in awareness.
Mhm.
You know, there has been like empowerment for the planet, then for women, and now is a time for more diversity. And I want to thank you for sharing your story, and also, you know, me as a white male, I do have a responsibility in also bringing more diversity because it's just so easy to just stick with the group of people that you grow up with. So thank you for sharing. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I thank you so much for inviting me and definitely making this conversation at the center of as a part of this topic, because it's super, super important. Um, but thank you so much again for inviting me, and thanks to the audience for being here.
Thank you.